The planet of Veles was not one of the shining stars in humanity's vast empire. It had been long forgotten, tucked away in the farthest corner of space. But for Dr. Nathaniel Grant, an archaeologist who specialized in ancient civilizations, this quiet and desolate world held a mystery he couldn't resist. It had been years since anyone had ventured here, and yet there was something in the old star maps that piqued his curiosity. A legend, a forgotten story about a powerful alien warrior, one that had been buried for centuries. Dr. Grant sat in the cockpit of his small exploration ship, staring out at the glowing planet below. His crew, a mix of seasoned explorers and archaeologists, were ready to land. They had heard the rumors, the legends of a warrior queen trapped in time, but to most, it was just a myth. A story passed down by ancient beings, but no one had ever found any proof. To Grant, that was exactly what made it fascinating. "Dr. Grant, we're coming up on the coordinates," said Lieutenant Sarah Torres, his trusted second-in-command. "Are you sure about this? The readings from the planet's surface are odd." "I'm sure," Grant replied, eyes focused on the planet below. This could be the discovery of a lifetime. The planet Veles had been home to a once great civilization, a people whose history was wiped out long ago. However, one part of their history remained: the tale of Aelin, the great warrior queen. Legend said she was a powerful ruler who led her people to great heights, but when her empire fell into chaos, her own people saw her as a threat. In a desperate move to stop her, they buried 3 powerful swords in her chest, sealing her powers and condemning her to an eternal slumber. The legend said she would one day awaken, but no one knew how or when. Some believed that the removal of one of the swords would unleash unimaginable destruction. Grant didn't believe in fairy tales or myths, but this one, he thought, had some truth to it. There had been strange energy readings from this planet, ones that no one could explain, and all signs pointed to the legend being more than just a story. He was determined to find the truth. As they descended, the landscape of Veles unfolded before them. Dense jungles of towering trees, their trunks covered in strange glowing moss. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of unknown creatures echoed through the mist. The coordinates led them to an ancient ruin, half hidden by the overgrowth. A large stone temple loomed ahead, its entrance flanked by 2 towering statues, their features worn by time but still imposing. The atmosphere was heavy with mystery. "Looks like we found it," Grant murmured, his voice barely audible as he stepped off the ship, his boots crunching on the soft ground. The team quickly set to work, scanning the area with their advanced equipment. There was an energy source underground, one that had been dormant for centuries. It led them straight to the temple. With a few careful movements, they managed to break through the temple's entrance, revealing a long, winding corridor. The air inside was cool and still. The walls were lined with strange markings, an alien language no one had ever been able to decode. But in the center of the room, they found what they had come for: a stone platform, and on it, an alien figure. The warrior queen, Aelin. She lay still, her body encased in a stone sarcophagus-like shell. The 3 swords were embedded in her chest, glowing with an otherworldly energy. The light from the blades pulsed, as though alive, reacting to their presence. Her features were perfectly preserved, her face serene yet commanding. There was no sign of decay, no sign of time's cruel passage. She looked as though she could wake up at any moment. Grant's heart raced. He had found her. He had found the woman from the legend. His fingers itched to touch the swords, to uncover the secrets of the past. But he hesitated. He had heard the stories. Removing the swords could unleash something dangerous, something no one would be able to control. And yet, the temptation was overwhelming. "Dr. Grant, should we proceed?" Lieutenant Torres asked, her voice filled with caution. Grant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at Aelin's still form. The temptation to unlock the mystery of her powers gnawed at him. This was what he had been looking for, the discovery of a lifetime. But at what cost? Yes, Grant said finally, his voice firm. We're not here to be afraid of legends. We're here to uncover the truth. The team set to work, carefully examining the stone sarcophagus. But as they did, a strange feeling filled the air. The energy in the room seemed to grow stronger, the hum of the swords growing louder with each passing second. The temperature in the room began to rise, and a faint light flickered in Aylin's eyes, though she remained still. Grant didn't notice the slight movement at first, but then a low growl of power filled the room, a sound like thunder, coming from deep within the stone. Something was happening. The legends weren't just stories, they were warnings. The moment had come. They had awakened something. The air inside the ancient temple was thick with an eerie stillness. Dr. Nathaniel Grant's heart raced as his eyes remained fixed on the stone platform where Aylin, the legendary warrior queen, lay motionless. The three swords, glowing with an unnatural light, were embedded deep into her chest. Their presence was almost hypnotic, drawing everyone's gaze. Despite their beauty, there was something unsettling about them, like they were not simply weapons, but keys to something much more dangerous. Dr. Grant, are you sure this is safe? Lieutenant Sarah Torres' voice broke through the silence, filled with concern. Her hand hovered over the controls of her scanner, which beeped and flashed in response to the energy readings coming from the swords. Grant didn't respond right away. He was too absorbed in the sight of the warrior queen before him. Every detail of her face was perfect, untouched by time or decay. The markings on her skin suggested she was an alien, her features both majestic and intimidating. The three swords embedded in her chest seemed to pulse with a strange rhythm, as if they were alive. Safe? We don't know if it's safe, Grant said, his voice low. But it's too late to turn back now. We're here, and we have a chance to uncover something no one else has before. We have to know. Torres didn't look convinced, but she nodded. She understood the pull of discovery, even if it came with a dangerous edge. Grant approached the stone platform slowly, cautiously. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on him. This was not just a tomb or a ruin. It was a moment in time, frozen, waiting to be unlocked. He reached out and placed a hand on the stone surface, feeling the coolness of the rock against his skin. The air seemed to thrum with energy, vibrating beneath his fingertips. The closer he got to Aylin, the stronger the sensation became. It was as though the room itself was alive, as though it was waiting for something to happen. Dr. Grant. Torres started again, her voice hesitant. We've been here for hours. The energy readings are off the charts. If we disturb her... I know, Grant interrupted gently, though his voice was firm. But we can't just leave her here. If the stories are true, she's been locked away for centuries. We owe it to her, and to ourselves, to find out what happened. Aylin's figure remained still, her eyes closed, as though she were merely sleeping. The room was filled with the soft hum of the swords, their glow brightening and dimming in a rhythmic cycle. Grant stepped back and motioned for his team to join him. One by one, they gathered around the platform, scanning the environment with their devices. Despite the danger, a sense of wonder filled the room. They were standing on the edge of an incredible discovery. Aylin wasn't just a legend. She was real. What if Lieutenant Torres began, clearly struggling with her thoughts? What if we're not supposed to wake her up? What if we're disturbing something that should remain hidden? Grant turned toward her, his expression serious. We won't know unless we try. He knew there was a risk, perhaps even a great one, but this was a chance to unravel a mystery that had been buried for centuries. It was too significant to ignore, too powerful to be left forgotten. Without waiting for further discussion, Grant made his way to the closest sword. The first sword was deep within her chest, its blade sharp and sleek. He reached out cautiously, his fingers brushing the hilt. The moment he touched it, the air around him seemed to tremble. A sudden surge of energy shot through his hand, and he jerked back, startled. The sword was clearly connected to Aylin's life force. But what kind of force? Grant wasn't sure. He glanced back at his team, who were watching intently, unsure of what was happening. "Grant, are you all right?" Torres asked, her eyes wide with concern. "I'm fine," Grant replied quickly, though his heart was pounding. He could feel the sword's energy now, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He had to be careful, but he knew that the next step was inevitable. "You sure about this?" Torres asked one last time, her voice filled with uncertainty. Grant nodded, his face set with determination. "We have to see this through." He carefully placed both hands on the sword's hilt, and with a deep breath, he pulled. The stone platform beneath him seemed to tremble, and for a moment, he thought the entire temple might collapse. The sword resisted at first, but with a low groan, it slowly came free. As soon as the sword was removed, the entire room seemed to change. The energy that had been swirling in the air exploded outward, rippling like a shockwave. A strange, low hum filled the space, and the temperature in the room shifted, growing warmer, almost oppressive. Aylin's body began to shift. Her chest rose and fell, as if breathing for the first time in centuries. Her skin flickered with faint light, as though the sword had unlocked some hidden power deep within her. For a brief moment, Grant thought he saw her eyes flicker open, glowing faintly. But before he could be sure, her body went still again. A strange silence fell over the room. The energy from the sword seemed to fade, and the room's vibrations quieted. It was as though something had been set in motion, something far beyond their understanding. Grant stepped back, his pulse quickening. He had done it. He had freed the first sword. But now, the question remained, what would happen next? The room felt heavier now, and Grant could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He had awoken Aylin, but was this the beginning of something great, or had he just released a power they were not prepared to face? The warrior queen lay motionless again, but her body seemed more alive now than before. She had been disturbed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Dr. Nathaniel Grant took a cautious step back, his hand still hovering above the sword he had just removed. The air was thick with a charged energy, pulsing as if the temple itself was reacting to the action. He glanced over at his team, their faces a mix of awe and apprehension. Lieutenant Sarah Torres stood nearest to the platform, her eyes wide with shock. "Grant, what have we done?" she whispered. Grant swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on Aylin's still body. The warrior queen was unmoving, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. It was as if a door had opened, and they were now on the other side of it, trapped in a moment they could not control. The sword, still glowing faintly in his hand, felt heavier now. Its energy, once subtle, had grown more pronounced. He could feel it pulsing through his fingers, as though it was alive and connected to something far greater than himself. "We've awoken her," Grant said, his voice quiet. "But she's not fully awake yet. We need to be careful. We don't know what will happen next." The rest of the team gathered closer, their scanning devices still working overtime to pick up any signs of movement, any shifts in the environment. The room hummed with energy, the glowing swords in Aylin's chest casting long shadows against the stone walls. The second sword, still embedded in her chest, seemed to glow brighter now that the first had been removed. "Do you think we should remove the others?" Torres asked. There was hesitation in her voice, a wariness that Grant could understand. After all, they had just disturbed a powerful force that had been dormant for centuries. The risks were enormous. Grant shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. We don't know what removing the other swords will do. Let's take a step back and analyze what we've triggered before we act further." They all fell silent, waiting for any sign that something was about to happen. The minutes stretched on, but nothing changed. Aylin remained motionless, her body almost lifeless in the stone sarcophagus. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if she were breathing, but there was no sign of consciousness. Then suddenly, a faint tremor ran through the floor, followed by a low, almost imperceptible hum. The stone platform vibrated beneath them. Grant's eyes snapped back to Aelin. Her body shifted ever so slightly, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw her fingers twitch. "Did you see that?" Torres whispered, her eyes fixed on the Queen's hand. "Yes," Grant said, his voice barely above a whisper. His pulse quickened. "Something's happening." And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the tremor stopped. The room went still again, the air thick with tension. They waited, every second stretching into what felt like an eternity. The silence seemed unbearable. Grant wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his mind racing. Had they made a terrible mistake? Or was this the first sign of Aelin awakening? Without warning, a burst of light erupted from the stone platform. It was blinding, filling the room with an intense, otherworldly glow. Grant stumbled back, raising his arm to shield his eyes. His team reacted quickly, moving to the sides of the room for cover. The light lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it faded, the room fell into a deep, unnatural quiet. Grant lowered his arm, his heart pounding in his chest. There, in the center of the platform, Aelin was no longer motionless. Her eyes were open, glowing with a faint ethereal light, and her body shifted as though she was regaining control over it after a long slumber. She slowly sat up, her movements smooth but deliberate. The three swords, still embedded in her chest, seemed to react to her presence, the light around them flickering as if they were acknowledging her awakening. The glow in her eyes intensified for a moment, then settled back to a soft, almost peaceful radiance. Grant took a hesitant step forward. "Aelin, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle, but filled with urgency. They were no longer dealing with a legend or a myth. She was alive, and he needed to understand what that meant. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, Aelin's gaze shifted to him. Her eyes locked onto his, and Grant felt a shiver run down his spine. Her gaze was piercing, intelligent, and ancient. It was as if she could see straight through him, reading his thoughts, his fears. "Human," she said, her voice low and rich, but filled with a power that made the air vibrate. "You have awakened me." Grant stood frozen. The sound of her voice was both beautiful and terrifying. "We didn't mean to disturb you," he said quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. "We only wanted to understand." "You have understood more than you realize," Aelin interrupted, her tone both commanding and knowing. "The sword you removed, it was but the first key. And now, there is no turning back." Grant's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the weight of her words, the gravity of the situation settling around him like a storm cloud. What had they really unleashed? What power had they disturbed by pulling the sword from her chest? Aelin slowly stood, her tall, imposing figure towering over them. The stone platform cracked as her feet touched the ground, the remnants of her long, forced slumber crumbling away. She was free, but her presence filled the room with an aura of danger. "The others will be removed," Aelin said, her eyes never leaving Grant's. "But not by you. I will do it myself." Her words were clear, final. The room grew heavier with each word, as though the very air was responding to her power. Grant took a step back, his mind racing. He had awoken something ancient, something beyond their comprehension. The legend of Aelin was true, and now they had no idea what consequences awaited them. "What happens now?" Torres asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. Aelin's gaze shifted to her. "Now," she said, her voice like thunder, "we face the future that was always meant to be." The room was filled with a strange silence. Aelin stood tall before them, her presence as imposing as the mountains outside the temple. The three swords that had once been embedded in her chest now pulsed with a faint, eerie glow, as if they too were awakening. Her eyes, glowing with ancient power, swept over each member of the team. Grant's heart raced, He had heard the stories of Aelin, the warrior queen from another time, but nothing in those old legends had prepared him for this moment. Nothing could have. Aelin's voice broke the silence. You, humans, are not what I expected. Grant swallowed, still processing the weight of her words. What do you mean? Aelin's eyes flashed as if amused. You think you have awoken me by removing one of the swords. But no, it was your presence, your curiosity, your own hunger for answers that freed me. The room seemed to shrink around them as Aelin spoke. Her words held a force beyond anything they could comprehend. The very air felt thick, like the temple was alive with energy. Torres stepped forward, her voice cautious. So, what happens now? What do you want from us? Aelin turned her gaze to Sarah, and for a moment, the room seemed to tremble. The power radiating from her was overwhelming, and yet she held it in check, as if testing the humans in front of her. I want nothing from you, Aelin replied, her tone steady. But I have seen your world. I have seen the destruction that has come to it. You are fragile, a species on the brink. Grant frowned. We're not on the brink. We've been through hardships before. We've survived. We've built. We've thrived. Aelin gave him a look that seemed to pierce right through him, as if she could read his very soul. You think you have thrived. You have barely survived. And now you disturb the ancient forces that once ruled this world. You seek knowledge beyond your understanding, and yet you are unprepared for the consequences. The tension in the room grew heavier. The other members of the team remained silent, unsure of how to respond to Aelin's words. There was no doubt that she was powerful, more powerful than any of them had anticipated. And yet Grant couldn't help but wonder if she was right. Were they truly ready for what lay ahead? What do you want us to do? Torres asked, her voice steady but clearly anxious. We didn't come here to endanger your world. We just wanted to learn. Aelin's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Your thirst for knowledge blinds you. But I understand it. You seek what the ancients have hidden. The power that lies beyond your understanding. Grant's mind raced. She spoke of ancient forces, of hidden power. What was she truly hinting at? And you think you can help us find it? Grant asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Aelin's eyes glowed even brighter. I can show you what lies hidden, but you must understand the cost. The forces I command are not meant for the unprepared. They have been sealed away for a reason. There was a long pause as her words sank in. Grant looked at his team. They had come here seeking knowledge, hoping to uncover secrets that could benefit humanity. But now it was clear that there were deeper forces at play, forces that might not be so easily controlled. We didn't come here to cause harm, Grant said softly, but we've already disturbed something ancient. And now we need to know what comes next. Aelin nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving him. The next step is yours, human. You've already awakened me, and now you must choose. Will you continue to seek the knowledge you desire, or will you walk away and leave the past undisturbed? The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Grant's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. On one hand, they had uncovered something incredible, an ancient warrior queen, powerful beyond belief. On the other hand, they had no idea what consequences their actions might have. Could they control what they had unleashed? Could they survive it? But the curiosity that had brought him here, the same drive that had led him to study ancient cultures and uncover long-lost secrets, refused to let him walk away now. He couldn't. We have to keep going, Grant said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. We need to understand what's at stake. We need to learn what this power is and what it means for our world. Aelin's smile deepened, though there was no warmth in it. Very well, she said. But remember this, human. Knowledge is a double-edged sword. Seek it if you must, but be prepared to face its consequences. Grant felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever they had unleashed, they were in it now. there was no turning back. Aelin's voice softened. "I will guide you. But know this, your survival is not guaranteed. The power of the ancients is not a gift. It is a test." The room seemed to pulse with energy, as if responding to her words. The air around them grew warmer, and the swords embedded in her chest glowed brighter, each one pulsing with a rhythm of its own. It was as if Aelin herself was drawing strength from them, or perhaps they were drawing strength from her. Grant looked around at his team. They were all silently processing what Aelin had just revealed. They were standing on the edge of something monumental, something that could change everything. But was it worth the risk? Was any knowledge worth the price they might have to pay? "Let us begin," Aelin said, her voice full of ancient authority. "But be warned, the path ahead is not for the faint of heart." As she stepped forward, the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift. The very stone of the temple responded to her, moving in ways that defied reason. It was clear that they were no longer in control. They were at the mercy of forces far beyond their understanding. And so, with no other choice but to follow, Grant and his team stepped forward into the unknown, their hearts filled with both dread and wonder. What would they uncover next? And would they be able to survive the truth that lay ahead? After a few minutes of intense fighting, the control room door loomed ahead. Ryder signaled for his team to take positions. He pressed his hand against the cold metal door, his heart racing as the final moments of the battle approached. Maya, ever the strategist, stepped forward. "Once we're inside, we need to shut down the system. Fast. If we don't, the Queen will launch another attack, and we won't have time to stop it." Ryder nodded. "Understood. On my count." With one last glance at his team, Ryder took a deep breath and gave the signal. The door slid open, and they stormed inside, weapons raised. Inside, the central control room was as advanced as the Queen's ship itself, with glowing panels and alien technology covering every surface. But Ryder knew they didn't have time to admire it. They had a mission to complete. The Xanthian officers inside the room scrambled to defend their command center, but the humans were relentless. Ryder and his team quickly overwhelmed them, securing the control room and setting to work. Maya immediately moved to the central terminal, typing rapidly as the computer systems flickered to life. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I can shut down the cannon, but I'll need a minute to override their security protocols." "Make it fast," Ryder replied, his eyes scanning the room for any more threats. The alien soldiers had been dealt with, but they couldn't let their guard down yet. "If the Queen sends reinforcements, we're finished." Maya's fingers danced over the keys, her focus unwavering. Ryder paced the room, his mind racing. The fight wasn't over until the Queen was stopped. He glanced at the view screen, seeing the remnants of the shockwave cannon still active, hovering ominously in the distance. If they didn't act now, the Queen would unleash another devastating blow, and it would be the end of humanity's resistance. Suddenly, the ship's systems began to reboot, and an alarm blared. "They've detected our breach," Ryder said, gritting his teeth. "We're running out of time." Maya didn't look up from her work. "I'm almost there. Just hold on." Ryder could feel the pressure mounting as the alarm grew louder. The seconds felt like hours, but his team held their ground. He knew that if they failed, humanity would never get another chance. With a final keystroke, the screens flickered and went dark. The cannon's power signature disappeared from the display. Ryder let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Done," Maya said, her voice filled with relief. "The cannon's offline. The Queen can't use it anymore." A cheer erupted from the team, but Ryder's expression remained serious. "We're not done yet. The Queen's still out there, and she'll come for us." Just as he spoke, a loud crash shook the room, and the walls trembled. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow. Ryder's heart sank. He knew what that meant. "They're here," he said, his voice low. "Get ready." The doors to the control room burst open, and a new wave of Xanthian soldiers flooded in. This time, they were led by none other than the queen herself, her massive figure filling the doorway. She glared at the humans, her eyes burning with fury. "Do you think you've won?" Queen Rilfer's voice boomed, filled with contempt. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ryder raised his rifle, his team ready for the fight of their lives. The battle was far from over, and now they were facing the full wrath of the Xanthian queen herself. "We'll see about that," Ryder said, his voice steady. The atmosphere in the control room grew thick with tension as the Xanthian queen entered, towering over the humans with her cold, calculating gaze. Her long, spiked crown glistened in the emergency lights, and her armored body radiated an imposing aura. She had seen the humans' progress, their success in disabling the shockwave cannon, and her rage was palpable. "You think you can stop me?" Queen Rilthar's voice echoed through the room, chilling every soldier in her path. "You are nothing but insects to be crushed underfoot." Ryder stood his ground, his grip tightening on his rifle. His team was ready, every muscle tensed for what was to come. The mission wasn't over. No, it had just escalated. The queen's soldiers flanked her, their weapons raised and ready to fire. Ryder's mind raced as he assessed their options. This was it, the final fight. "Stay focused," Ryder said to his team, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've come this far, and we're not backing down now." When the light finally faded, the room was still. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the team, their eyes adjusting to the dim light that now filled the chamber. The air felt charged, thick with energy. For a moment, no one spoke, as if they were all trying to process what had just happened. Grant's heart pounded in his chest. He had felt the power, the immense force that had surged through the room when Aelin raised the swords. It was like nothing he had ever experienced, like the very world had shifted around him. But Aelin stood still, her face unreadable, as if she were waiting for something. Her 3 swords glowed faintly now, their energy simmering just beneath the surface. But they were no longer blinding. She lowered her arms, and the room seemed to settle, though the tension still lingered in the air. "What did you do?" Torres asked, her voice trembling slightly as she stepped forward. "What happened?" Aelin did not respond immediately. She glanced around the room, her eyes distant, lost in thought. It was clear that whatever she had done, it had taken a toll on her. But there was also a deep sadness in her gaze, as if she understood the gravity of the situation better than any of them. "The power that sleeps in this place," Aelin finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "It is not something that can be controlled. Not by anyone, not even by me. It is ancient, far older than anything you can comprehend. It was buried for a reason." Grant stepped forward, his mind racing. "So, what happens now? What did we just unleash?" Aelin turned to face him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "The power has been awakened. The swords, the force they contain, it is tied to this temple, to me, to the very foundation of this world. But it was not meant to be used. It was never meant to be released." Grant frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "If it wasn't meant to be used, then why did you bring us here? Why show us all of this?" Aelin looked down at the swords embedded in her chest. The glow from them pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat. "I didn't know. I didn't understand. But now, I do. You were always meant to find this place, to awaken the power. The prophecy, it was always about you." The team exchanged confused looks. A prophecy? Grant had heard enough about ancient prophecies to know that they rarely brought anything good. They had followed Aelin, trusting her to lead them. But now, with the power released, the consequences were unclear. "What prophecy?" Grant asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "And what does it have to do with us?" Aelin took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging slightly. "The prophecy speaks of a time when the swords would be freed, and when that happened, a great darkness would rise. It was always said that only a human would have the power to stop it. but I didn't know what that truly meant until now. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Grant felt a chill creep up his spine. A great darkness. Was this what they had awakened? The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and the responsibility was heavier than he ever expected. But we didn't know, Torres said, her voice shaky. We didn't know what we were walking into. We just followed the trail you set before us. How could we have known that we were unlocking something dangerous? Aylin's eyes softened, and she stepped toward them, her movements slow, deliberate. You didn't know. But now that it is unleashed, you must be the ones to stop it. You must be the ones to take the swords and use their power to seal away the darkness once more. Grant felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy cloak. He had thought they were uncovering history, ancient secrets that would give them knowledge and power. But instead, they had found something much darker, something that had been buried for a reason. Why me? Grant asked, the question slipping from his mouth before he could stop it. Why would it be a human who can stop this? Aylin's gaze softened with something like sorrow. Because the prophecy said that only a human's heart, their strength, their will to fight for what is right, could counterbalance the darkness. The power of the swords cannot be controlled by force alone. It must be guided by someone who understands what it means to be human. Grant was silent for a long time. The weight of the task that lay before him was enormous. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, if anyone could truly stop the power that was now unleashed. But there was no turning back now. He had come this far. They had come this far. And if there was even a chance of stopping the darkness, they had to try. I don't know if I'm the one you're talking about, Grant said, his voice steady despite the fear rising within him. But I'm not going to let whatever this is destroy everything we've worked for. I'm in. The other members of the team nodded in agreement, though they too were uncertain of what lay ahead. But they had come together on this journey, and they couldn't abandon it now. Aylin's eyes glowed brighter, a flicker of hope flashing within them. Then the path is set, she said. But be warned, the darkness is not something that can be defeated easily. You must be ready to face the very heart of it. Grant nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. They were walking a dangerous path, and there was no telling where it would lead. But one thing was certain. The fight was only beginning. And now, it was up to them to finish it. The silence in the chamber felt like a heavy weight pressing on their chests. The ancient temple, with its towering stone walls and mysterious glow, now seemed more like a cage than a sanctuary. The swords, still embedded in Aylin's chest, pulsed with a low, ominous light. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone, to make the final move. Grant looked around at the team. Torres, Daniels, and the others were all visibly tense, their faces marked by fear and uncertainty. Aylin stood at the center, her body still and poised. But there was a deep sadness in her eyes. She had warned them all, but now it was up to them. They could either walk away and leave the power of the swords to do as it pleased, or they could face whatever was coming and try to stop it. We can't just walk away, Grant said, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, though the uncertainty lingered in his words. The darkness is already here, and it's not going to stop on its own. We have to do something. Aylin nodded, her expression solemn. The swords are meant to be wielded by one with the heart of a human. But the power they contain, it's not something we can control, I know, Grant interrupted. He had heard enough about the darkness and the prophecy to understand that it wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't sure if he was ready to bear the weight of the world on his shoulders, but if no one else would, then it would be him. Aylin stepped forward, her eyes locked onto his. You must know that to wield the swords is to make a sacrifice. You will never be the same. The power will change you, Grant. It will test you, push you to your limits. There is no coming back from this once you begin. Grant swallowed hard. He had known that the moment he agreed to take this on, there would be no turning back. But now, standing in front of Aylin, he wondered if he truly understood the full extent of what that meant. Then what choice do we have? Torres spoke up, her voice shaking. We came here to stop this. We can't just stand by and let everything we fought for crumble. We have to fight. There was a fire in her eyes, one that mirrored the determination Grant felt growing inside him. They had come this far. They had found the swords, awakened the power, and now it was their duty to ensure that the darkness didn't consume everything. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the world they wanted to protect. Grant turned back to Aelin. "I'm ready," he said, though doubt still lingered in his heart. "Tell me what to do." Aelin stepped back, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "The swords must be removed. Each one holds a different aspect of the darkness. Together, they form the key to the seal that binds it. You must take each one, but you must also understand the cost. It will take everything you have, your strength, your will, your humanity." Grant took a deep breath. He wasn't sure if he could handle what Aelin was asking of him, but he didn't have a choice. There was no turning back now. He stepped toward Aelin, who stood motionless as if waiting for him to make the final decision. The first sword gleamed with an eerie light as Grant reached for it. He gripped the hilt, feeling the strange energy surge through him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sword seemed to come alive, sending a jolt of power through his entire body. It was like every muscle in his body was on fire, his mind spinning with visions of destruction and chaos. But somehow he held on, refusing to let go. He wrenched the sword free from Aelin's chest, and the chamber shook with an intense force. A deep rumble echoed through the temple, the walls groaning under the pressure. The sword was now in his hands, and with it came a rush of power, dark, dangerous power. Grant staggered, barely able to keep his footing. The energy from the sword was overwhelming, like it was trying to consume him from the inside out. He could feel his body starting to change, to shift. The darkness was trying to take control, but he fought back, focusing on his humanity, on the strength he knew he had within him. The second sword gleamed in the dim light, and Aelin stepped aside. She did not speak, but her eyes were filled with an understanding, as if she knew that the test was far from over. Grant reached for the second sword. This one was even more powerful than the first. As soon as his fingers brushed the hilt, a wave of energy surged through him, and his vision blurred. He saw flashes of the past, wars, pain, and suffering, images of a world torn apart by the very darkness he was now facing. But he held on, refusing to be overwhelmed. His mind was strong, and he knew he had to remain focused. With a roar of effort, Grant pulled the second sword free. The power it released was even greater than the first, and he felt his body trembling under the strain. But he didn't let go. He gripped the last sword, the one that would seal the fate of the world. This one was different. It felt lighter in his hand, yet it carried the weight of everything that had come before. The power of all the darkness, all the destruction, rested in this final sword, and it was up to him to use it to save them all. The moment the last sword left Aelin's chest, the temple shook with the force of an explosion. The walls cracked, the ground trembled, and the air grew thick with the energy of the swords. But Grant didn't flinch. He stood tall, the three swords in his hands, and felt the power course through him. He had made his choice. He had accepted the cost. And now it was time to face the darkness. Aelin's voice echoed through the chamber. "You have done it, Grant. But remember, the darkness will never stop. It will always seek a way to rise again. The question now is, are you ready to fight it?" Grant's answer was clear. He stepped forward, the swords raised high, ready to face whatever came next.